resign.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Jayme CheeseSlice, the engineer and producer of Uncontrolled Opposition. We were formerly known as Left on Left, but we decided to change our name for good reasons, because we didn't want to just try to appeal ourselves to the left. We want to appeal to everybody. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Gloria and Jayme so we can record our 1 hour session for the radio. Hello, Gloria.
Hey,
and
Jayme.
Hello, Jayme. How are you guys doing?
Hey, Jayme.
Very good.
All right. So we're going to talk about Jeremy's article today, where he talked about the SLA and the PSYOP that was performed on America to try to discredit the left and the ramifications it's had leading into today. So why don't you guys jump right into it and let's have a good show.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. No, you haven't misdialed. We were formerly Left on Left. I'm Gloria Guillo, a former administrator in New York City government, an investigative journalist, musician, and co-founder of Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement. I'm joined here today by a resident expert, Jayme Kuzmarov. Jayme is a professor at Tulsa Community College, a historian, investigative journalist, and managing editor of Covert Action Magazine, an online magazine that focuses on CIA and deep state activity. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. Today's show is on the Symbionese Liberation Army. We will discuss Jeremy's article in Covert Action Magazine dated 7/3/25 titled COINTELPRO Operations Helped Create Today's Dystopian Political Environment Strategy of Tension. Let's put a spotlight on what is meant by a strategy of tension. After we take a quick look back at the 60s, many consider the 1960s a turning point in American history. We witnessed civil rights marches, anti-war protests, and labor strikes. These events were transformative. For nearly a decade, real systemic change seemed within reach. Economic justice, racial equality, and peace abroad. But something happened in the wake of this cultural uprising. The momentum stalled. The movement splintered. The vision was buried. Why? Well, after the upheavals of the 60s, U.S. intelligence agencies working as instruments of the predator class set out to neutralize what they identified as a threat to power dynamics. This wasn't solely done through open confrontation, but also through covert destabilization. The same FBI that wiretapped Dr. Martin Luther King and ran COINTELPRO against the Black Panthers also infiltrated peace groups, student organizations, and feminist collectives to sow distrust, discredit leadership, and demoralize membership. Meanwhile, economic power was consolidating. The 1970s brought the slow death of the New Deal consensus. Think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and Cato Institute, funded by oil barons and banking families, rose to redefine freedom as the absence of government interference in corporate affairs. Neoliberalism wasn't born in a vacuum. It was incubated in a climate of confusion and fear, economic stagflation, urban crime waves, foreign threats, amplified by media narratives shaped by intelligence-adjacent actors. The goal simply wasn't to shift policy, but to shift the center of gravity in American political thought. Intelligence operations during this time weren't always dramatic. They were also discreet. The removal of inconvenient politicians and social influencers, the funding of moderate opposition to radical movements, the creation of fake organizations to divide and discredit. These weren't theatrical, they were documented. By the 1980s, what passed for left politics was largely performative, stripped of class analysis, pacified, professionalized. Meanwhile, the apparatus of surveillance and social control expanded quietly and permanently. Today, we live in the legacy of that strategy. The public distrusts activism, not because movements failed, but because they were sabotaged. The radical becomes suspect. The status quo, no matter how unjust, becomes the safest bet. And all of this benefits one group, the predator class, who feared the promise of the 60s, a promise that power could be decentralized, that wealth could be shared, that empire could be dismantled. So if you've ever wondered why progressive momentum seems to die just as it gains force, why uprisings turn into slogans and leaders into brands when they're not assassinated or imprisoned, it's not just cultural fatigue. It's not just human weakness. It's a system staffed and organized to fracture, confuse, and keep people fighting shadows while the real machinery of power rolls on. The strategy of tension was never about defeating an external bogeyman enemy. It was always about defeating our capacity to dream of a better world and to organize with each other to build it. Jeremy, please tell us about the Symbionese Liberation Army. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gloria. And as usual, yeah, very good analysis that you present right at the outset. And yeah, I think this episode, it's a history from 50 years ago now, but yeah, it's very, very significant in shaping the political landscape that we're living under, as you pointed out, by destroying the left wing and social movements of the 60s. That was a project of the U.S. intelligence agencies, as you say, acting on behalf of what you call the predator class. And this was, I think, just one component of a much larger project. And those, actually, the Trilateral Commission was an elite commission that was connected with top figures of the Jimmy Carter administration and the Rockefeller interests. And they had put out a report, the crisis of democracy, as far as the 60s movements, that there was too much democracy in the 1960s because you had all these groups asserting their rights. You had a strong anti-war movement, a movement for a transformation of U.S. foreign policy toward more peace-oriented, less imperialistic foreign policy, a redirection of the American political economy. And that's not what the power elite wanted. And they didn't, I think especially didn't want people, speaking their mind, and minority groups were coming out to demand more and more rights for themselves. So that was a threat to democracy, and they used all kinds of, covert and criminal means, really.
I think you don't mean it was a threat to democracy. It was a threat to the predator class's control.
Yeah, well, they call it that. That was a report that they released called "Crisis of Democracy." And they were pretty, the language was pretty honest that this was too much democracy. And the predator class doesn't want democracy. So this was used as a threat that had to be destroyed. And so, yeah, as a segue, now we can get into the details of this particular group was influential as part of that project because it created a very negative image of the left-wing movements. That was part of the aim, to make like these movements, the counterculture movements, the 60s and anti-war left was something negative, violence, to link it in the public mind with violence, criminality, being against America. I mean, really was not against America or American. I wanted to transform American institutions, make America better, but it had to be depicted as violent, anti-American. So the Symbionese Liberation Army, people may not know about it today, especially young people. This was a radical kind of cult-like group, extremely radical, violent cult-like group that now we have evidence, because I was reviewing an excellent book by Brad Schreiber called Revolution's End. And yeah, sometimes we only learn the full story, decades later, because these are secret covert operations, and it's only before people die or certain journalists pressed for the release of documents, and it takes 30 years or more sometime, and finally we can learn the truth all those decades later. And that's why historians tend to be very cynical about the present, because we know we're being lied to, and we know the truth may only come out 30 years from now, but we know it's going to be completely different from what we're being told, or the public impression. So what this book showed is that, yeah, there was a CIA program to create the Symbionese Liberation Army. Again, was a violent cult-like group that carried out criminal acts in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they gained fame because they kidnapped the heiress of the Hearst dynasty. Patty Hearst was a young woman whose grandfather was William Randolph Hearst, who was like a major media mogul of the early 20th century, who made a fortune in the newspaper industry and other industries, extractive industries, I believe. And his newspapers were known for promoting, like what we see today on Fox News or other outlets, spreading war propaganda and like fake news, fake information to demonize an enemy and try and mobilize public opinion for war, especially like the Spanish-American War. His papers were notorious for accusing Spain of bombing American ship. That the USS Maine was said to have been sunk by Spain, but actually it was an internal fire. But his paper said Spain, and I show this to my students, Spain, sunk American ship, killed all these sailors, and that was designed to mobilize public opinion against Spain and to support U.S. involvement in the Spanish-American War. Anyway, so Hearst made a fortune, and you can go to the Hearst Castle. I visited in San Luis Obispo with the beautiful mansion he lived in and built. So his granddaughter, she was a symbol of the American plutocracy and ruling elite. So they kidnapped her and took her captive and brainwashed her and got her to go along with some criminal acts they were carrying out, like robberies. And they said, oh, this is a action on the behalf of the people. We're robbing the bank to get money for our liberation movement. But it was just criminal acts that caused violence and deaths. I think people got killed in some of those robberies, and these were criminals. And I mean, the rhetoric, they would issue these communiques with kind of over-the-top rhetoric, and that may be a sign. We can learn from the history what to look for as far as groups that are infiltrated. Well, if they're carrying out criminal activity that's going to alienate a lot of the public, kidnapping an heiress and brainwashing her, and over-the-top rhetoric, they use this term for police, pigs, and that's, there are issues with the police, but that's going to alienate a huge swath of middle America, especially people who work in law enforcement or their families. As we know, there are a lot of good people in law enforcement. There are some bad cops, but there are a lot of good cops. So to label all cops as pigs is just going too far, and it's going to alienate a lot of the population. So that was the kind of rhetoric they used, over-the-top stuff, just designed to alienate people. And then they carried out a really dastardly act. They murdered the superintendent of Oakland schools, Marcus Foster. And actually, the CIA spread disinformation to members of the Symbionese Liberation Army that he was developing projects, to spy on black students, and was part of the power establishment. When really the evidence indicate that he was very dedicated. He had been a teacher and a dedicated school superintendent who was committed to trying to improve Oakland schools and inner city schools, for black people. But they spread this disinformation, and then he was murdered. And they made like it was this righteous act, but it was really just the cold-blooded murder of a good man, and it was part of the plan to alienate, to associate this left-wing group, this countercultural group, with acts of murder of school officials and over-the-top rhetoric. And what the Schreiber book goes into is how this group was set up. That the founder was a guy named Donald DeFries, who was an African American who presented himself as this great revolutionary figure. But what Schreiber shows is that he was really a petty criminal from Cleveland, Ohio, who had abandoned his wife with a lot of kids and just did petty crime. He got, arrested numerous times. Then he became an informant for the LAPD Red Squad, which was involved, in undercover surveillance and surveillance of left-wing groups. And then they sent him to this mental health facility at Vacaville, which received a lot of state funds. And really, that's where they were doing these MK Ultra mind control experiments. And he was like a guinea pig for the Project MK Ultra, which we've discussed previously on the show. It was these CIA mind control operations where they used drugs and hypnosis and program people to become killers or assassins, or just to act on command, like robots, basically. And as far-fetched as it sounds, we actually have strong evidence that they've done this in other cases, and their newly released documents about all these scientists and the techniques they were developing, and some have openly bragged about it as well. So this is not the stuff of conspiracy or science fiction. It's actually documented, and the Schreiber book, goes into detailed and done really tremendous research. The author deserves great credit for exposing the story. So, and a key person was this guy named Colston Westbrook, who was, I guess, his handler, and he was also African American. And they used, and it's an example of how they use blacks as guinea pigs for these kind of sadistic experiments. I mean, it's not that far removed from the Tuskegee experiment, where they're using blacks for their own agenda, destroying their lives and then the other lives. So yeah, Colston Westbrook was a CIA operative who had helped to found the Korean CIA, which I'll have an article soon in Covert Action about that. That was a horrific offshoot of the CIA set up in South Korea that was like a fascist Gestapo type organization that was involved in all kinds of torture and mass surveillance and hunting down dissidents and spreading propaganda and disinformation in South Korea. So he's helped set that up. He was then involved with the Phoenix Project in Vietnam, and then he was a handler for Donald DeFreeze, and then they set him up at Berkeley, Colston. DeFreeze was programmed to set up this group, this radical offshoot and there was a very vibrant left-wing movement, in San Francisco and California in the 60s that was against the Vietnam War, that was also trying to, spread environmental consciousness, experiment with alternative ways of living that would be more in tune with the environment and that would facilitate a more peaceful society. So that they had to co-opt again and destroy that. So they create this violent cult-like group that professes to have some of the ideals of that movement, but really, has spread this violent, poisonous rhetoric, carries out these terroristic and criminal acts. So that's what Westbrook and others set up DeFreeze to do, as this, and they made this false image of him as this revolutionary leader who was leading his flock. And Westbrook actually taught courses in anthropology and African American studies at University of California at Berkeley. And we see the corruption of higher education in this story. And then they recruited idealistic young students. And sometimes they were very, very good students who were very sensitive to injustices, experienced by African Americans and other injustices in American society. Like one of the recruits was a guy, Willie Wolfe, who was tragically killed. And he had nothing to do with the crime that SLA had committed, but he had some affiliation with the organization. He had been a student at Berkeley who did some great term papers and was a very good student. And actually, Patty Hearst said he was the kindest, gentlest soul she ever met. But he was the type of person they recruited and got to be involved in SLA. They got students at Berkeley. And if you Schreiber, and there's one other researcher named Mae Brussel, who's a legend in exposing American deep state. She also did an investigation into the background of a lot of the SLA members were agents provocateurs. Like she and Schreiber traced their background to various institutes that had ties in the past to the CIA. So that there were some real members who got kind of people involved in the 60s movements who got kind of caught up in this, because they did try and romanticize guerrilla activity, and they kind of presented themselves as like Che Guevara and carrying on that kind of mission. And some people got caught up with it, or maybe like Wolf had some kind of loose affiliation with them, but a lot of them were agents provocateurs. And the whole idea was to create a negative image of the left-wing movement, to destroy them, and that's what they did. And ultimately, because of all their criminal acts, the police went to arrest them, and there was the police carried out a raid on one of their houses, and ultimately destroyed the house. The book goes into how the police violated all kinds of protocols and murdered many of them. Like Willie Wolf got murdered, and he, I think, only had loose affiliation with the SLA, but was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But they didn't allow them any opportunity to surrender. I think that was part of it, is that they had to destroy and kill all of them, in part because the informants knew too much about how this whole thing got set up. Because like one of them, an eyewitness observed that she was shot by police in the back. And there was no negotiation. They fired like 5,000 rounds of live ammunition into this house, when I don't even think there very few were armed. I don't think even there was any shots fired in return from the SLA member. They just destroyed the house, murdered some of the people as they were trying to flee from the house, and almost everybody got killed. I forget what happened to DeFreeze, but he served his purpose, and it's really a sad story. I mean, the level of manipulation here is really kind of shocking and disturbing. So I could probably go on for more and provide more detail, but go ahead, Gloria.
I just was hoping that Jayme would put up a picture of
they cultivated this image, like they wanted to present themselves as these outlaws, and that is, design is going to alienate people. If you're trying to build a viable left-wing, movement to counter war and to try and transform the economy of the country in a more humane way, this is not the way to go about doing it.
I just want to explain the image to our audience, who are just audio. Basically, the image has and this is a very famous, iconic image. It has Patty Hearst, who is really quite little. She's like 5'3", and I think she weighed about 110 pounds. And they have a photo of her in a beret, because you can't be left without a beret, and you can't be a revolutionary without a beret. You need the beret. And she's holding, it looks like an automatic weapon. I'm not really quite sure what type it is from the photo. And then behind her is this red flag. And on this red flag is like this giant snake. It's like a Hydra type snake. And it's a very compelling image. And so I think one of the things that we see when we see a CIA op is they have really good iconic imagery. And then, as Jeremy's pointing out, they also have a giant shootout at the end. And we think of David Koresh and Waco with giant shootouts that don't really make sense and seem completely misplaced, and everyone dies. And there's basically very few witnesses remaining, if any. So we see things like that. The other thing that we see is this history of these types, like Charles Manson, or Donald DeFreeze, or Jim Jones, Reverend Jim Jones, or who else do we have? David Koresh. We see a lot of patterns between people who are either former military or have been incarcerated. And we also see that in these incarcerations, that they're in these particular institutions or programs that are, like a mind control program. And it's really quite silly. And in Jeremy's article, he mentions Donald DeFreeze mentioning his plan to another inmate, and he's saying, "Yeah, we're gonna kidnap, some wealthy person, and then we're going to rob a bank." It seems like some kind of fantasy. I mean, who thinks about that when they're in prison? This elaborate plot. But he was, in this area called Vacaville Medical Facility, and that had a history with the MK Ultra type stuff. And then also what we see when there's someone who we believe is programmed, which in this case would have been Donald DeFreeze or Charles Manson, or maybe Jim Jones, or a whole host of others that have been involved in this stuff. We see that them repeating these tactics on their followers or their captors. I mean, their captives. And in the case of the Symbionese Liberation Army, Patty Hearst was, and I recall when this happened, I was a child, but I remember this. They were saying she's not guilty because she was put in a closet and held in a closet in isolation, I think naked, raped, brainwashed for, I think it was years. Jeremy, how long was she in this kind of a situation where they really are trying to, these are typical CIA tactics in torture and mind control.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they repeated the tactics on her that they had used on DeFreeze, and often they use enhanced interrogation tactics and different forms of psychological torture. And that Vacaville facility, was heavily funded by the Reagan. Ronald Reagan was the governor of California in the late 1960s, and he supported that Vacaville facility, and his health. The head of the cabinet in the health department was a guy named Dr. Earl Bryan, who is connected to the Phoenix Project and the theft of the Promise software, which was a big CIA operation to steal this computer software that they could use for their own purposes. And Reagan was a champion of the CIA, and was on the far right. His whole platform was to attack and destroy the social movements of the 60s. I think Hearst was held in captivity for well over a year. I don't think it was more than 2 years, but I think this played out over a good year and a half when she was in captivity. And she was, Robert J. Lifton was a great psychologist. I think he interviewed her and did a study of her. And she had been manipulated and brainwashed, and I believe raped in captivity. She was charged with crimes, but she was exonerated by Jimmy Carter when he was president. And then I think she went back to living the life that was expected of a Hearst heir as like a great philanthropist in the city of San Francisco, and focused more on raising horses and private life. After that, she was never even political before. And in fact, her boyfriend said she had kind of reactionary views. They had like the Chavista movement in California at that time with Cesar Chavez and the farm workers. And like he remembered her ex-boyfriend or fiance remembered her making like disparaging remarks about the farm workers movement and the poor and stuff. She was, kind of apolitical and maybe somewhat snobby, as a rich girl. But then she got caught up in this. I mean, she was ultimately a victim of this sinister project. It shows how the CIA manipulates people. I mean, that is their modus operandi. I think you make good comparison with Charles Manson, Jim Jones, because I think each case you could look at, and there have been good books on the Manson case. There was a recent book that we reviewed at Covert Action magazine by a journalist named O'Neill, who did outstanding research, like Schreiber, over years and years to get at the truth of Manson, who had also been a police informant and was also, it appears, targeting the CIA mind control. And it was the same idea to make the 60s era movement and the ideal of the movement, to spin it that they were violent, anti-American, and out to subvert American life. And we know the story of how the Manson girls committed these horrific murders. But that was all part of the same thing, to destroy the image of the 60s movement in the eyes of the public. And Jim Jones was the same thing, because that was a leftist cult that brought in a lot of people who were involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement in the Bay Area, because the People's Cult Temple that Jim Jones was this religious preacher, and he formed a church that had more of social justice emphasis. He brought blacks and whites together, and he preached more socialist rhetoric in his church, and was supporting the civil rights and anti-Vietnam War movement. And people who were in those movements who were looking for some religious component of their life joined his church, seemingly more progressive church. But then he let his flock astray. He brought them to Guyana, where he purchased some property. And then the famous Jonestown massacre. But Jones himself, and we can maybe do another show on this, and I've done an investigation and published an article in Covert Action magazine that showed that Jones was outed as a CIA agent in Brazil in the 1960s and had worked in Guyana to help install. That's how they got the land, because he was working for the CIA in the 60s during the time when the CIA orchestrated a coup against Chetty Jagan, who was a socialist and an Indian. And they played the game of divide and conquer like we discussed in the United States. They pitted they deliberately stirred up a race conflict between the Guyana's Indian population and its Afro population, and ultimately empowered this dictatorial figure, Ford Burnham, whom Jim Jones was very close with. And that's how he got all that land, brought his followers to Jonestown, and they were all massacred. They were all murdered. And Jones appears himself to have gotten away and been given a new identity. And again, that was a 60s era. It embodied the kind of hippie ideals in his church. So this is designed to discredit that. That it's associated with this cult leader, and he got them to drink the Kool-Aid and commit suicide. Or actually, most of them were systematically murdered. It all fits together, that they create the public image of the hippies as somehow bad, evil, prone to violence, when that was really a movement of peace to transform American society in a more peaceful way. It was against the horrors of the Vietnam War. I was raising questions about everything in American life and American history, because they identified more with the Native Americans and how they had been subjected to genocide, and that their culture was more able to live more in tune with the environment and with less violent than American culture. And so those are the kind of questions that the predator class doesn't want people asking, and doesn't want people invoking that history. So they found a way to destroy those movements through really psychological warfare of the American public.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the future. I mean, Jayme is a historian, and Jayme is most comfortable dealing with something when it's released and he has the documents in front of him, and he's got the memo, he's got the receipts. I tend to look ahead, and I use a lot of what Jayme and I discussed to look ahead. And what I see coming up right now is kind of on the left, you have something called intentional communities, okay? And on the right, you have these prepper communities. And this seems like the perfect grounds for the CIA's next assault and the next infiltration, because really they don't want the word community to mean something useful. They want the word community to mean something terrible. So if they infiltrate intentional communities and do some horrible stuff, or they infiltrate prepper communities and do some horrible stuff, then people are going to be more isolated. And they really what they found out with with different programs is that the more you insulate and isolate an individual, the weaker they are. The more you destroy their integrity as far as who they are sexually, who they are related to, what their family ties are, what their neighborhood ties are, what their community ties are, what their country ties are. The more you isolate that individual, the easier they are to manipulate and control. So if you're in a prepper community, or you're thinking of going to an intentional community, and it's got a charismatic leader who has a history in either law enforcement or in recently released from a prison, look out. If the community, it has really great sex for everybody sleeping with everyone, it's a wonderful thing, think about it. If they say they're not your children, they're the community's children, and they take your children away from you and want to, raise them in the community as opposed to having your review of them, think about it. So we found a whole bunch of techniques that are used. So consider these techniques. These are the CIA mind control techniques that have been used in all of these groups. And I also looked ahead at some other groups that we haven't really focused on yet. One is NXIVM. And then the other one is we haven't really gotten into what's this other group, the Heaven's Gate group, but we'll get to that one day too. So here are the mind control techniques: sleep deprivation, food restrictions, and you could find in all of these groups there's sleep deprivation and there's food restrictions, and some so low, I think it's like 500 calories a day. I read in NXIVM. And then the other thing is hypnosis and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And I started looking into what exactly is that, and it sounds like sales techniques. It's really crazy. They get you to say yes, 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 and then all of a sudden they touch your shoulder and you feel like this connection to somebody, and then they start giving you like the real crap. They kind of get you in that way. Then the other thing is blackmail. They get you to do something and use it against you. Coercive control, similar to that. Then trauma bonding. And we should really discuss trauma bonding, because trauma bonding is an incredible way that narcissists use to control people, as well as the CIA. And that's where you're, giving somebody something that they need, and then torturing them, and then giving them something they need. So, watch out for trauma bonding, folks. Public shaming. We hear a lot of this public shaming and these confessional rituals in groups like EST. What's the one that is in California that's huge? Scientology. They go into this public shaming and confession rituals. Watch out for those. When they start doing the confession rituals, get out. Just walk out, guys. And then, of course, sexual control and exploitation. Watch out for that. Isolation, the closet. I think I had read with Jim Jones that they actually had like a burial torture. Was it Jim Jones, Jeremy, where they actually they would have like a mock burial. They would put a person in a casket and put them like in the ground and then in a basement, and then leave them there for a while and then take them out. I mean, there was all kinds of really horrific things. And then, of course, you have to have this apocalyptic messianic message. Like the leader is not just the leader. He's not just an ex-con or an ex-military, CIA, deep state guy, but he's really the Messiah. And he knows. So, once you have someone that's elevated and idolized, it's time to say, I don't know about this. Let me get out of here. And then there's symbolism and uniform language. And we see, especially with, the Symbionese, they had this, the great photo of Patty Hearst, which was, became iconic. And they also have, the same imagery for all of these groups. There's some, really catchy thing. So, that's kind of how to protect yourself, folks, and where the CIA and the deep state may go next. It's the intentional community that may have different intentions than you do.
Yeah, and one other group that I think, yeah, and you're right. I mean, I am a historian, so I'm interested in examining these historical cases and also seeing the long-term ramifications, which I think in this case was serious because although I think the left had its own internal weaknesses, it really destroyed the left and created the dystopian environment we have today, where we have two right-wing parties. And many are warning of a fascistic like turn in our government. You have to look at the lack of an authentic opposition and lack of a real left, and how that was deliberately destroyed, and also the lack of opposition to American wars because the Student for Democratic Society and 60s movements opposed the war in Vietnam, developed consciousness about U.S. imperialism, and that was destroyed in the process of destroying those movements. And the neoconservatives have been able to go on the rampage around the world for the last several decades with a very weak opposition. And one other group that's worth mentioning is the Weather Underground, which is also a cult-like group. And there are a lot of memoirs. And Gloria, I think you make some excellent point of signs to watch for, because these groups, take on cult-like nature, and you have these leaders who manipulate people. They may have been themselves manipulated or groomed for that position. They take advantage of people. They end up introducing different forms of torture. Like the Weather Underground was another offshoot of the Students for Democratic Society, which it could have evolved into a new political party in the United States, or possibly an offshoot of the Democratic Party with more genuinely progressive ideal that would oppose the forever wars, oppose the CIA, and push for more humane economy. But so the Weather Underground actually took the name SDS. They seized the name of the organization, destroyed it, and they promoted these bombings around the country against certain targets that would deliberately alienate middle America, and make them it seem like SDS was a terrorist organization. And within the Weather Underground, like with Symbionese Liberation Army, they had cult-like qualities, and they all had to sleep with they also had weird sexual practices that devolved into a lot of the women got raped, were used as sexual dolls for these leaders who were built up as these godlike figures. Uh, and people ultimately in those groups suspended their own rational judgment. They got caught up too much, and I think the CIA knows people are easily manipulated. They know human psychology, and that certain people get caught into these movements sometimes and will go too far, or are prone to just follow these messianic type figures, whether it's Jones. In the Weather Underground, you had Bernardine Dorn and William Ayers. And then, ultimately, they ruined the reputation of the left. They did nothing productive, and it destroyed the left. And then, the leaders had to go underground, but, suspiciously, in that case, with the Weather Underground, when they came above ground, they had committed all kinds of crimes, bombings all across the country, and yet they faced no jail time. And then they became these distinguished professors. And Bill Ayers was very tight with Barack Obama, so that's kind of suspicious. And some they led people in the Weather Underground got killed. One of the bombs detonated in the New York townhouse, and 3 of their people there got killed. Others got sent to prison for life. And yet these 2 become these celebrity professors and are tight with CIA Obama, who we'll do another episode on, who, the evidence makes clear he was, and his family had a long connection to the CIA. And actually, I scrutinized, because I did a book, Obama's Unending War, and I looked into his background, and I found that his memoir was part of that CIA project of discrediting the 60s movement, because they include in his memoir, which was ghostwritten. I don't think Obama wrote that book, and it's filled with misinformation about his own family. But in any event, there's a page devoted to attacking Stokely Carmichael and the Black Power movement. And that's right out of the playbook of the CIA. Use Obama, this black leader, to attack the 60s movements, and Stokely Carmichael was an iconic leader of the 60s movements, who was a genuine anti-imperialist, a genuine spokesman for Black rights, for human rights, and really an outstanding leader of the 60s movements. So they had to use Obama to denigrate and mock him. They used the CIA language of ridicule and mock legitimate social movement leaders who aren't cult-like figures, but encourage people to think for themselves and develop good political analysis. So, I think also there's a lot we can learn from that history. So I appreciate your comments about the present day, how people can learn. I mean, as a historian,
I've got one for you that I just saw recently, like within the last, I don't know, it's maybe 8 months. It's it's called the American Communist Party. And, people were like, oh, it's legitimate. It's not legitimate. It's legitimate. It's not legitimate. So I looked at it and, it has this speaker who is the leader, and, he's charismatic and kind of fiery, and behind him are guns and knives on his wall. Okay, folks, when you see a charismatic leader with guns and knives on his wall, think perhaps this might be a deep state project.
Yeah, and that seemed more like amateur hour. I mean, he's not really built that following, so it's just like they're kind of, experimenting with it, and it might not go anywhere because this guy isn't the real deal. I mean, these guys are really charismatic. Like, it's a certain personality that can become a cult leader, and Jim Jones had that. He had the magic. He was a brilliant preacher. He could sway. He could move people to tears in the audience. And they really, believed him, and he had the good looks, and all the women, and he also, a lot of these cults, the leader, just sleeps with as many women as possible, and he's able to manipulate them that they throw themselves at him. So it takes really a special kind of individual who has that charisma, good looks. And they may try and groom people, but a lot of time they're second rate, and it just doesn't go anywhere. But they may find a good one for today.
In this case, the group is trying to do some illegal activity in Haiti, some kind of revolutionary thing with weapons. I mean, there was some stuff to it. I don't know how far they got with it, and I'm kind of tired of reading about it. But, I'm just saying, we have to look for the signs.
Yeah, but it may yet happen because, look, the CIA realizes that there's deep disaffection. And if you talk to young people, they're really totally disaffected with the status quo. There's no legitimacy of the system. There's a lot of ideas and energy as to how we can move things toward change. So the CIA is going to try and co-opt an FBI manipulate that. So look out for it. They'll create somebody with real charisma who can develop a real huge following off YouTube, a young person, and he'll lead the sheep astray, as we've seen in these other cases. So that's why, people have to think for themselves, not worship one leader, but just develop their own analysis and use common sense and judgment as well.
Yeah, it's the old saying, if it sounds too good, it is too good, and, just there's some common sense things. So I think it's also, just very important for people to, try to get away from the sensation that we're told we're supposed to be lonely and isolated, and that's how they really get us in these cults, in these things. They get religious cults are big too, even in the yoga community. I think you had the one in Oregon. Do you remember the guy's name in Oregon? They had a big yoga thing, and they had actually a series on Netflix about it too. I mean, I think all of this stuff is definitely has some handle on it, some fingerprint.
Well, they take advantage. People are longing. Yeah, a lot of people these days, they are isolated. They want to be part of something big. They want it bigger than themselves. They want to develop a sense of community. They want to interlink with people of similar value system. So unfortunately, those are all good impulses. The problem is you have the predator class and its agents, the CIA, ready to manipulate people into something nefarious, and that's what we have to be on guard about.
What else do we have? I think we had some other things that we could say.
Well, yeah, and again, I want to underscore the political significance of the Symbionese Liberation Army. I mean, it may seem like just some minor fringe thing, but I think this really threatened the authority. You know, the left-wing movements in California were very, very strong, and there was a whole generation that was really rising up. And this was a real threat to the political establishment and power elite. And so they had to use these kind of, really sinister and underhanded methods. And it's really about ultimately manipulating public opinion to try and ultimately reinforce the status quo. And I think the destruction of the left is in that era is so crucial, because that was really something promising that was destroyed. And it paved the way, as you said at the beginning, to the unfettered triumph of neoliberalism, neoconservatism, unfettered capitalism, and U.S. imperialism, with terrible consequences, I think, for our society. So I see this as very, very significant in leading us down the terrible path we've gone on. So it's worth studying that history and seeing how we can rebuild those social movements independently.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the American Communist Party for blank and giggles, and it really is. Yeah, I'm looking at the knives on the wall, the no shirt, the tattoos. What's he called? He's called a chairman. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's silly, and people, and it also has, I think, Jackson Hinkle is a big proponent of this group. So I guess he's the pretty face. I don't know, but just look, folks. Just look at the stuff.
Yeah, and ultimately we need to develop strong independent movements that can ward off these kind of phenomenon, and that's not always so easy to do. The history show that they were very effective in infiltrating the Students for Democratic Society, which is a big, huge campus organization in the '60s, promoting very good ideals, more social democratic program and anti-war, anti-imperialism, and they infiltrated and co-opted it. Not through, and I think that the trick is that people don't realize what's happening when it's going on. They don't arrest every member of SDS, so they create the illusion of a functioning democratic society. But they insidiously infiltrate and co-opt it, and again set up these radical front groups to discredit that organization and the entire movement, entire idealism behind that movement. So, I mean, in many ways, it's a very amazing achievement that they pulled off. So, yeah, these people are very sophisticated. I mean, there's the impression some have they're just bumbling, fools in the FBI and CIA, and that's not the case. They're very, very shrewd, and they study. They know the psychology of people on the left and young people. So, I mean, for today, yeah, we have growing campus movements. Like a lot of it is focused on the Israel-Palestine. Now, we've argued on this show that movement needs to broaden beyond that topic, although that is a terrible situation. Now they need to grow into a larger anti-war, anti-imperialist, possibly left-wing movement. But these strategies will be used. They've already been used for that movement. And we discussed on the show, we had that episode with Celia, and there's a lot of question marks if they didn't set up this phony murder to try and discredit the pro-Palestine groups as anti-Semitic. So they use Psy-war and all kinds of dirty tricks. And the more people are attuned to that, the better. And we got to keep growing as a progressive movement with good judgment and good principles.
And one of the things that we advocate here is you study history, and we study the Symbionese Liberation Army, and the name is funny too. So okay, here's a couple more clues. If it's the word patriot is in it, be careful. If the word liberation is in it, be careful. If the word democracy is in it, be careful. These are all names that they like to use, and they always mean something else. Yeah, and so that's also a key thing. And
Yeah.
Jeremy and I were having a little discussion before this, and he's saying about the left values and right values and things like that. And I was saying, I really think this goes beyond left and right values. I think most people, okay, want to have a sincere relationship, healthy children, a nice home, a car, a good education for their family. They want to leave their family in a better condition than they had to endure. And I don't think these values are left or right. I think these values are just human values. So when all of a sudden they say, okay, well, these are left values, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Or these are right values, it doesn't make any sense either. These are human values. People want to have a nice life. And people don't want war. They don't want strife. They want, they want to take their vacations. They want to have some money in the bank. They don't want to live paycheck to paycheck and in a state of total, fear. So, this whole institutionalization and this propaganda of isolation and the individual is, you're separate from your family. There's no more nuclear family. There's no more extended family. There's no more this, that, the other thing. You're just alone. And then you're easy pickings for these groups and these things. So, just one thing too, not only looking for these signs, but also strengthening yourself. And I'm going to get a little off topic here, Jeremy. I'm sorry. There's a lot of chatter on the internet right now that July is going to be a big false flag month. And I'm hearing this from all over the place. Then there's a whole host of astrologers who are saying that today actually is a really red flag day. It's a full moon, and that this is going to be kicking off some other planetary things. For those who study astrology, especially Vedic astrology, there is a conjunction between the lunar south node Ketu and Mars. And when that happens, there's supposed to be some fireworks. So people are predicting the 10th, then they're predicting the 20th. I think more the 23rd or the 24th when we have a new moon. So I think it's a full moon at the end of the month. So, this tension that comes up with these predictions and, makes people edgy also. But I think in general, what I've experienced anecdotally, just talking to people, is people are kind of revved up, not even knowing that something may happen this month, or this may be a false flag, or there may be some astrological stuff. People seem to be having a lot of tension. And I don't know, Jeremy, if you're experiencing that too, or you're seeing people that are a little bit more on edge in the last couple of days than normal, but I have seen that.
Well, if I could make 2 points to wrap up. Number one, I think that would be part of the strategy of tension that goes back to the Symbionese Liberation Army, and that they deliberately want to keep people on edge, constantly in fear, and that way they're willing to sign away their liberties. And point number two is that I think they demonized the left. There was a deliberate project to associate the left with negative things, when in principle the left was cultivating more humanistic ideology that favored more egalitarian economy, resources devoted to human need and not warfare. So that they have to really cultivate this demonization that the left is bad. In Israel, it's gone so far as I interviewed these conscientious objectors, and they said they asked them, "Are you on the left, or the left want to kill all the Jews?" I mean, that's just totally ridiculous. These are just part of a demonization campaign because the left-wing program threatened the capitalist ruling elite because it called for higher taxes, breakup of corporate monopolies, possibly nationalized industry, breakup of the military-industrial complex. So, related to the Symbionese Liberation Army, that was part of that project. And a lot of people don't even understand what left right is. Left is not something bad. But I mean, yeah, you can discuss. Not everybody maybe consider themselves a leftist, but you can talk to them about these issues openly, and that's what we want. Anyway, we have to wrap up now, so we can discuss this further again.
Jayme, can you tell our audience how they can follow your important work?
Sure. You can follow me. Well, I have my own personal website, JaymeKuzmarov.com. I'm on Substack, Too Hot for the Mainstream Media, and I'm the managing editor of Covert Action Magazine.
Thank you. The opinions you hear are ours, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. So that wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Thank you.
All right, good job, Gloria. That was
good job. Got it in the pocket. We've got kind of spoiled. We've had a lot of like really illustrious guests lately. Oh my God! And we're gonna have Celia Farber back. She's been writing on weather weaponization, and she's been knocking it out of the park. I mean, she's
really
writing such great stuff. So yeah, she's gonna.
Matt Weinglass is really into that too.
Yeah,
he didn't. I think he got started on it when he started investigating Lahaina, and then it kept coming up, and then it happened.
I got to run because I got stuff to do. So yeah. But we'll discuss the future shows. Yeah. But good job, guys, and thank you, Jayme.
Yeah, thanks, Jayme.
Thank you, Jayme.
All right, I'm gonna head out too. I got a ton.
All right, with that, I guess we'll wrap up the show, and I hope everybody enjoyed it today. Thank you, Gloria, and we'll see you next week. So, bye-bye, everybody.